Hello, welcome back. Welcome back to the Sunrise and welcome back to our Bible study here at Sunrise Christian Fellowship. We are Sunrise Christian Fellowship where joy does come in the morning. I am Pastor Keith. So happy to have you with us on this evening. This is our Wednesday night Bible study where we really are working our way from just reading the Bible, merely reading the scriptures and everything like that, and really starting to teach how to study and pull out every little ounce of goodness and nuggets that are in the Bible. We are in the book of Romans. We are moving through chapter 9. And we're working towards. We're going to try our best to try to get all the way to the end of chapter 9, but we'll see if we make it there. But we're glad that you guys joined us. We are a church that is planted and meant for the east side of East Las Vegas. We're on our way. We're almost there. We're working our way there. We'll be over there soon. But for right now, we are doing primarily most of our stuff via online. But we're glad that you decided to join us on this Wednesday night. And we got some good stuff that Paul is kind of working through. Some of it is hard, this particular part of where he's going. I'm pretty sure it was a hard message for him to preach, which is what we're going to get into as we get going. So we got all the way up to Pastor Parton last week, got us all the way up to verse number 22, which is where we're going to start. We will reference verse 19. I'll kind of just reference it a little bit, but we're going to start at verse number 22, and we're going to be reading out of the NIV. And so here in chapter 9, verse 22 in the NIV, Paul is still talking to the Romans, and he's still kind of doing this thing that Paul does where he asks a question, and then he kind of proves why the question is right, and then he kind of answers his own stuff. Paul is a good debater, and so what he does is he gives a statement and then he'll debate the other side of it, almost as if like, I know what you're gonna say, and he'll bring it up and then he'll kind of like work through all that as well. So he does that kind of through the rest of the chapter here. But he says in verse number 22, which is where we're going to start, he says, what if God, although choosing to show his wrath and make his power known, bore with great patience the objects of his wrath, prepared for destruction? And so Paul is still kind of like answering the question from verse number 19, where he said, one of you will say to me, then why does God still blame us? For who is able to resist his will? So it's kind of like those same things. He's still answering that question that you made us this way, right? And God, you created us like this. So how are we being punished or justified for your own creation, right? And he just said the scripture before in 21, where he's talking about, does the potter have the right to make the same lump of clay? Can he make it for special purposes, or can he make it for something that is just for common use? So it's a questioning of God. God, from our standpoint, since we are the clay, we are what he's made us into. We're like, God, how can you, blame us if you know all this and you created us this way, and we don't make it, or make the way that we're built, we don't make the decisions correctly, I guess, in order to be able to receive salvation and be saved. And it's really one of those things where, God is the creator, right? And so Paul poses this question in 22 where he says, what if, right? What if then? What if God, although choosing to show his wrath? So it's really saying that although God is justified in his wrath. Wrath is in the Greek is a word named orge. Orge is shorter a version of the word origami, and it means violent passion, right? Justifiable violent passion by punishment. So it's saying that although God is justified to do violent passion upon all of us, and he's justified in doing so, right? It says that although he has the right to do that and to make his power known, but instead what he does is he bores with us. He gives us great patience. And the word that is utilized here for patience, it translates over into the word forbearance. Now, I don't know how many of you have actually ever had to go through a process of forbearance or what that means, but let me give you a little bit of understanding what that means. Forbearance is restraint and tolerance, right? Where you're in the right to do something, you're in the right to require something of somebody. However, you're going to show restraint and you're going to show some tolerance to this particular person, right? The second part of that definition of patience, it refers to like the action of refraining from exercising a legal right. So God has legal right for him to show all of his wrath, all of his violent passion towards us, and all of his power, right, upon us. And I'm one of those people that truly believes that God has never, ever, in all course of history, given mankind his full power or shown us his full wrath, right? I don't think any of us have ever throughout history have ever been on the receiving end of God's full power and his full wrath, right? Even when God got upset and did things to humans and to people, I don't believe that the God that created the heavens and the earth and everything else ever exemplified his full power and his full wrath, right? But it says that he's rightfully to do so. He has the legal right to do so, especially enforcing a payment of a debt. So there's a debt that we've talked about this. Paul is bringing this up again, that we have already put ourselves in the hole. And it says, what if God is, although he's right to show us his full wrath and his full power, what if instead he is showing us great patience? He's given us some great amount of forbearance, right? The objects of he's giving that over to the people that are worthy of his wrath, the ones that have been prepared. And by prepared means we did it. We made ourselves ready for destruction. And that's a really cold thing to think about, that you have been making yourself this entire time prior to Jesus coming into your life. You've been making yourself ready for destruction. You've been setting yourself up for destruction. This is how you've been building your life, is for it to ultimately end in a destructive way, right? And so Paul is still answering that question, right? And he's saying, what if, right? And it's saying that God is still being merciful, even upon those that are destined for destruction. We have beat that point down several times throughout this. Paul has made this very abundantly clear. Some of us are going to not be saved. Some of us are going to be destroyed. Some of us are not going to make it into heaven. Some of us do not have a happily ever after. Some of us do not have roses and rainbows at the end of our story here on this earth and the afterlife, right? And so in that, he's answering the people that are saying, but God, you made us this way, right? And so what justifies you to destroy what you made in this way? And Paul is highlighting the fact that God is merciful, even to those that are destined to be destroyed. Why? Because if he was a God that wanted to just exemplify his power and wanted to just show his wrath and let everybody know, I'm God, this is what I can do to you. If you decide to disobey me, I could just do, if he was one of those ones that really wanted to just kind of flex on us, if he was that kind of God, wouldn't he have done that the very first time we messed up? The first time that we were old enough and had good enough knowledge and sense of good and evil. Paul has already explained all that to us. If the very first time we messed up, wouldn't he have killed us then? Wouldn't he have taken us out then? Wouldn't we have received his full wrath and power right then and there? Why would he allow what he does not desire to continue to be on the earth? Why would he allow that? Especially if he's all-knowing enough to know that you ain't going to change. Yeah. You're not going to do no different. There are some people that aren't going to change. They will hear the gospel, not change. They can hear the good news, not change. They can hear about Christ. They can know, they can listen. They can know that it may all very well be true, and still will choose not to change. Will choose to do whatever they want to do. Will choose to continue to do what they will on this earth, right? Whether it be, so with that being thought of, it's saying that God is still merciful because he doesn't strike us down right then and there. And those of us that are actually going to be allowed, or that those of us that are going to have a change of heart, he gets into that in the very next group of scripture. And here's a possibility why. So it says he could and would be right to take us all out immediately and not allow us the opportunity to do any more evil, right? But here's a possibility why he does not do that, right? So we understand that he's showing mercy for those that are going to be destroyed regardless. But what about those of us that won't? So in verse number 23 and 24, it says here, what if, he's asking the question again. So what if God, right, is choosing to show us some patience? And then he says, what if he did this to make the riches of his glory known to the objects of his mercy, whom he prepared in advance for his glory, even us, whom he also called, not only from the Jews, but also from the Gentiles, right? And so what Paul is saying here is that the destruction is due to all of us, right? But what if? What if God also, on the flip side, for those of us that are going to see and hear the gospel, hear the truth about God and have a change of heart, what if when God does show his wrath and does show his power, what if that is to also, really all of it was about to highlight the riches of his glory? Think about it in this concept right here, right? How do you really know something is good unless you know what bad is? How do you know something is poor unless you know what something is rich? How do you know something is hot if you don't know what cold? You know, you have to have the contrast or whatever to really exemplify the things that we're talking about here, for it to be really put into its proper context. We know this, those of us that have found love and have found the person we're supposed to be with and are married to that person, are in love with that person. We know how good that person is because of how poorly we have been in other relationships, right? You only know good mac and cheese after you've had some terrible mac and cheese, right? You only know when a day is beautiful outside because you've been through some terrible cold or very hot or rainy or flooding. You know when you have good weather because you've experienced bad weather, right? And so it's saying that maybe it's not really about that, part of it is about God showing his mercy, but the bigger picture of it is God is showing the richness and the glory of his richness. His mercy and his glory are both magnified at the same time by him, by us knowing that he does have the ability and will show his wrath and his power on us, right? It shows how rich you are. Both the unjust and the justified still receive mercy. The unjust are going to receive mercy all the way up until the day that it's their day to die, right? God is still allowing them to draw breath. And those of us that are going to choose righteousness and to choose Christ, we get mercy all the way up until we get that decision. And then when we hit that decision, God unleashes all of his riches upon us, right? But up until that point, God was showing us mercy. Then for us, he shows us his glory and all of that and starts to unpack that. So that's what Paul's kind of bringing out here. Both of them are going to receive mercy, right? And so it starts to bring up this whole thing of what you didn't even know that you wanted or what you didn't even know that you ordered. So it's kind of a question, right? I don't know if you guys have ever had this happen to you before, but I know I have. Have you ever been somewhere and you ordered something, like you ordered food or you ordered, an item or whatever, and they brought the wrong thing, right? They brought you the thing that you didn't order. But when you got it, it was better than what it was that you wanted, right? And so you wanted to keep it. I don't know if you guys how many of you have been to Chili's, but I never order the fajitas when I go to Chili's, never. But every time somebody orders the fajitas, you hear that sizzling coming out, it's like, shh. You're like, oh, I should have got that. You know what I mean? It just sounds and it looks better than what it is. And so there's a disappointment that you get sometimes when you get what you wanted. And it's like, man, I wish I would have got the other thing that y'all messed up with. Let me keep it. No, let me just go ahead and keep it, right? Rather than what it is that. And that's what happens to those of us. We were choosing our own way, and that was going to just develop us into destruction. And then God with his mercy, allowed us, those of us that are choosing to follow Christ, he allowed us now to enjoy the riches that come from that. And it's a much better deal than what we were supposed to be getting, right? In all of this, right? And take notice at the very end of verse number 24. Paul says something that's unique here. He uses the word us, right? Now, in this point in time, Paul is preaching to Gentiles. He's preaching to Roman Gentiles, right? But he's a Jew. And so what Paul is doing here by his word usage, it's meant to further unite the newly forming body of Christ, right? We know the body of Christ right now is multi-generational and multicultural, and there's black, there's white, there's Asian, there's Hispanic, there's Arab American, there's all these different nationalities. Christianity has evolved into this melting pot, if you will, or this tapestry of different ages and genders and all of that. But before it was meant for just one group, one particular group. But what Paul is highlighting is he's helping the newly evolving body of Christ to see themselves as a group that is different and diverse. And so he throws himself into it by using the word us, right? He says, say us, right? He's using us, right? And so although it is presented like a question that Paul is saying in these verses that we just read, he keeps saying, what if, what if, what if? Although he's presenting it like a question, Paul is brilliant and he knows what he's talking about and he's a well-studied person. Although he's forming it like a question, all that he is saying in this thing that seems question is already backed up by prophecy, which Paul already knows. And we know this because he gets to prophecy right after that. But he does this, and he has to do this all the time, referencing prophecy and going back to the Old Testament, because he knows that in the people that he's talking to, in those that he's preaching to, there are Jews in there. And they're going to always go back to what the scrolls and what the Old Testament said, and they're going to be looking for invalidations. And they're going to be looking for stuff to kind of invalidate Paul and say, you know, you're just making this up. This does not align with what our God, the God that you're claiming that you also follow, has said. So he always has Old Testament stuff in there that he's throwing in there. And that's what he goes into in these next couple of scriptures. So these next couple of scriptures, he's going to reference the stuff that kind of proves what he just said in the Old Testament. So first, the prophecy of including the Gentiles, because he said us. So he's got to be able to prove that God had in the inclusion of the Gentiles this entire time, right? So let's go to verse 25. So verse 25, it says, as he says in Hosea, right? I will call them my people who are not my people, and I will call her my loved one who is not my loved one, right? And so he's referring back to the prophet Hosea, right? Hosea, right? And so he's referring to Hosea 2 and 23. So he's going back to Hosea chapter 2, verse 23. I'm going to read that one for you real quick. You don't have to necessarily put it up on the screen. And so in that one, it says the exact same thing. It says, I will plant her for myself in the land, and I will show my love to the one I call, not my loved one. I will say to those called, not my people, and you are my people, and they will say, you are my God. So he's referring back to them in that particular scripture right there. And he's talking, referencing it back to God had a plan for the Gentiles already. He had a response for the rejection of Jesus by the Jews. He already sent this almost 700 years before Christ even showed up. Hosea says this, the prophet Hosea says these words nearly 700 years before Christ even shows up, right? God already had a plan. He already was planning on including us into this. He already had that one of those shuns we talked about that comes in your benefits package, adoption. He's already talking about adoption right here. 700 years before Christ even showed up and allowed us to have that access to be adopted by God. He's already telling us and giving us the foreword through the prophet that this is going to happen. The Gentiles are going to be included and that the Jews will reject Jesus. He already is saying that that's going to happen, right? And so then in verse number 26, in Romans, he says then, and sorry, let me get back to it. So in verse 26, he says, again, further talking about the prophecy, including the Jews, he says that, and in this very place where it was said to them, you are not my people, there they will be called children of the living God. And so again, he's referring back to something that was said by the prophet Hosea. He said those exact same words in Hosea chapter 1, verse number 10, right? Now, to give you a little bit of understanding and backstory of how this kind of ties us all in, because Hosea is talking, not necessarily, he is prophesying about what is going to come, but he is saying this message at the time directly to a group of people, right? And so at the time that this was actually said, when Hosea said it, they were these idolatrous exiled Jews that were in the north, in the northern regions, right? and they were north of Palestine at this particular time. And it was then that he was saying it to them. He was saying that they were going to be allowed to come back to their land and be allowed to be received and be reclaimed by God, right? And have restoration back into restoration given back to them, as well as their lands back in the Palestine. The way Paul means it for us as Gentiles, and this is really cool. The way he means it for us as Gentiles is he means it in that in places where there was previously heathens, now there will be Christianity. If you think about it, everywhere where Gentiles occupied over the earth in that particular time, they were considered heathens. They were considered filthy. They were considered pagans. They did pagan things. They did things that were unrighteous and unholy and all these things. And you got to think the world is expanding. There's people in all these other regions other than where Paul is talking about and where Christianity is really taking form, right? But Christianity now, you can see what Paul was even talking about, the spreading of it and how it was going to formulate in the way it is now. In all the lands where Christianity is now occupied, in North America, South America, Africa, Asia, Europe, all these other places, that it didn't necessarily originate, those were heathen places. They had pagan gods at those particular times. They worshiped other gods. And so what Paul is kind of referencing is that where there was once heathens, now there will be Christianity. And it's the same thing that he's talking about on a global scale. And he's also talking about it individually. Before you came into the knowledge of God, you were a heathen, right? You were a pagan. You were an unbeliever. You were a person that was just occupying and going straight towards whatever it was that you believe in unrighteousness. And then God showed up in your life, and now what was once filthy is now made clean. What was once dirty is now made clean. What was unjustified becomes justified. So he's talking about on a global scale. He's also talking about internally, individually as well. And so that is speaking to the prophecy that he's referencing to include the Gentiles. So again, he's proving that God had already said that this was going to happen. And he's doing it through scriptures in the Old Testament. The second part that Paul now gets into is now he's talking about how there's going to be the prophecy that only some of the Jews are going to make it, right? Again, Paul is talking to a mixed group here, right? So he has to talk to the Gentiles and tell them you're included. Now he's going to now address the Jews and tell them some of you are not going to make it. As a matter of fact, a lot of you are not going to make it. And here's why. So then he goes into verse number 27, and this is where he starts to talk about the prophecy of some of the Jews, and only some of the Jews will make it. He said, Isaiah cries out concerning Israel, though the number of the Israelites be like the sand by the sea, only the remnant will be saved. Only the remnant will be saved. And then he says in verse 28, for the Lord will carry out his sentence on the earth with speed and finality. So the scriptures that he's referring to back here he's referring back to the prophet Isaiah. He's referring back to Isaiah 10 and verses 22 and 23, as well as he will eventually get down to Isaiah 1 and 9. But this one that he's talking about right here is Isaiah chapter 10 and verse 22 and 23. Now, that word remnant is important that he's talking about here. So it's in the Greek, it's the word hupalepo. Hupalepo, yeah. And that's two words that have been separated. Hupo meaning under, and lepo meaning left behind. You want me to spell it for you? I got you. Okay, hupalepo. H-U-P-O-L-E-I-P-O. Two words separated, put together, hupalepo. Okay? And so hupo means under, lepo means left behind. And so when he's saying this thing to what the prophet Isaiah had prophesied about, he says, though the number of Israelites will be like sand by the sea, though Israel will grow to a unsurmountable number, an uncountable number, they will be prosperous in their reproduction, and how many of them there will be on the earth. He says only a remnant of them will be saved. And this word remnant is very important. What it means, it was used often when talking about being left behind, and especially in reference to those after a great slaughter. So it was really kind of like one of those words that you would use after someone's town was attacked and there was only a few of them that survived. They would say that's the remnant of that town, right? The remnant of those people. It was those that were left behind. They're the survivors. They were the ones. It was a negative almost connotation. They were the losers, the remaining losers of everybody that got wiped out, right? Paul is using it in a different way in reference to the fact that this remnant will be on the good side of it because you're the ones that's going to be included, right? Left behind in the sense that only some of them are going to return to God and survive. So he's saying at the end of all of this, only some of the Jews are going to actually return back to God through Jesus, right? Only some, only a remnant, a small number is going to be able to. And he's saying, the prophet Isaiah already told you guys that most of you are not going to make it. Most of y'all are not going to make it, right? And this pained Paul, right? Because you got to remember, Paul is a Jew. Yeah. These were his people. This was what he was called to. This is what he was trained under. He was killing, unbelievers and Christians and whatnot because he believed in this so very much so. But he has an understanding and a revelation through the gospel of Jesus Christ. To now he's like, I can see what God was saying even back then, and now it's happening, right? So then he says in verse number 29, he says, and it is just as Isaiah said previously, unless the Lord Almighty had left us descendants, we would have become like Sodom, we would have become like Gomorrah. Now, again, this is another reference that he's going back to what Isaiah said, and Isaiah has said this before, and we know Sodom and Gomorrah was those two wicked towns that God ended up just completely wiping out, right? Completely taking off the earth, right? And he's saying that Isaiah said this before, and it was also prophetic. He was talking to the Jews, in a prophetic way as well, letting them know that God is going to save a small number of us. Some of us will be saved, and we're grateful for that because otherwise he would have been to wipe us all out. And so it pained, like I said, it pained Paul that he could not, that this was going to be the situation. And he knew it to be so because Paul was living the prophecy as he was saying these words. Although he's referencing Isaiah back in the Old Testament, Paul is walking through what Isaiah is saying is going to happen. Because as Paul is preaching and he's going into these places and he's going into these towns and he's trying to tell the good news, Paul goes to the Jews first. As he shows up to a place to preach, he goes to the Jews first. Yeah. He goes straight to his people first. He goes straight to those he loves first. So you know that Paul is not saying this as a finger wagging and I'm good and y'all ain't kind of situation, right? He is trying his best to save his people that he loves. So he goes to them first before he even gets to the Gentiles when he goes to places and preach. And he tells them about the gospel of Jesus Christ. And he tells them about the good news and all this stuff. And he's trying to convey with these people. But it keeps weighing on him because he keeps seeing exactly what Isaiah said was going to happen because it keeps happening to him. Every city he preached in, he went to them first. And very few Jews accept the message of God. Very few Jews accept Jesus Christ. So he's seeing it happen. That remnant that he's talking about. Paul is watching it happen every city he goes to. He gathers all these Jews, he preaches to them, and only a few are able to receive the message. He's watching this prophecy happen before his very eyes. Just a small few people believe in him. The rest of them reject what he's talking about, right? And yet again, God already said that this was going to happen. And so that's all Paul is saying here is I'm just telling y'all what's actually happening. And I'm also telling y'all what Isaiah already said was going to happen. And the truth of the matter is he said that and they still went ahead and did whatever they're going to do and still rejected the message, right? And so it raises the question kind of to us. What causes you to mistrust your own people? Like what makes you not believe and not trust your own people, right? And I'll give you an idea. I'll give you an example. If one of your family members said that they made their own washing detergent, would you Or would you not blindly trust them and use it? It depends on the family member. That is your family. Yeah. These are people that you know supposed to. They're your blood. You know what I'm saying? You're supposed to believe in them. You're supposed to trust them, and all this stuff. Why do we find it sometimes that we have the hardest people that we have? The hardest people for us to trust is our own people. Why is that?
Maybe sometimes like the pattern of behavior from the past.
Okay.
Make their own toothpaste, but the toothpaste is not it. So it's like I'm not gonna trust
Yeah. And then also in regards to I guess you can use it in a family setting or whatever your ethnicity is. If the media continues to paint this picture, as much as you try to feel like you don't believe it, subliminally it's in your mind that it's a possibility. And so you like, I don't know about such and such. And with family members, if you got people talking about them enough and you don't know enough about them, it's planted this picture in your mind of who they are, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's true.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the idea can be planted by other people to cause you to have mistrust as well.
Excuse me. And so it raises this whole thing about what you already previously believe, right? So Paul is trying to get people who already have preconceived notions, preconceived beliefs, right? They rejected Christ mainly because he didn't look like what they believed he was going to look like.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? They believed their Savior was going to look a certain way, do certain things, come in a certain fashion, and Christ didn't come in those particular ways. And so it became hard for them to even trust their own people. Paul is one of theirs, right? And now he's saying, I have seen the light, literally. And I'm trying to tell y'all, hey, I figured something out. I found something. Now, if he had been who he was before, if he was Saul and he was saying all the stuff that they already liked and believed, they would have loved him. They'd have clapped for him. They would have welcomed him in. He could have stayed with anybody he wanted to and all that. He wouldn't have had no problems. None of that wouldn't have been being put in jail and persecuted and ran out of places, right? But because he was coming contrarily to what they believed, using the same scriptures and stuff that they also believe, it was hard for them. So this is my second question, and this one I think is a little bit more interesting. What would it take for you to believe the unbelievable from a family member? So we already kind of highlighted, you know, which family member and trust or whatever we already believe. So let's go ahead and say it's something that is unbelievable. So what would it take for you to believe a family member if they told you they know for a fact that aliens are real? That they met one and they know where they are and they talk with one of them and this is what they said. What would it take for you to believe a family member who said that they seen a ghost? Like, you know, ghost, you know what I mean? Like cast. What would it take for you to believe a family member that said that they seen Sasquatch with their own eyes?
I need proof. Yeah.
Right? You need proof.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that's going to help you to believe what they're saying to you. The unbelievable is proof.
Yeah.
Right? Perfect. That takes us into what Paul is going to close this chapter out in. Because just like the Jews, that's the same thing. They were looking for proof of what Paul was saying. And what Paul kept providing them as proof, they were unwilling to accept said proof. But the Gentiles, on the other hand, were happy to receive what Paul was talking about. We're happy to believe. You're telling me that there's a God that loves me, that is all powerful, all knowing, everywhere, has everything in his hand, right? And you're telling me that all I have to do in order to be loved by this God, accepted by this God, received by this God, saved by this God, is just to believe that he is what you said he is, and that, you know, just believe him and believe in his son. That's all I got to do. And Paul is saying yes. So you're telling me I get all of this stuff that comes with salvation. And all it requires is for me to believe and have faith. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to pay nothing. I get it, just it's freely given. And Paul is saying, yes. The problem with the Jews was that they were used to the law.
Yeah.
Right? And so Paul starts to run that whole rabbit down. Is the difference in those two things, in those two ideations, and why this is for Israel, what's happening. He starts to kind of go into this whole thing. What is happening to Israel right now? And so that's what goes on here. And so he starts off in verse number 30, and he says, what then shall I say? Paul is kind of saying, okay, so what does all this mean? What then shall I say? That the Gentiles who did not pursue righteousness have attained it, a righteousness that is by faith, but the people of Israel who pursued the law as the way of righteousness have not attained the goal? So you're telling me people who never was trying to get righteousness just found it and just get it. And then the people since the very beginning and the inception of mankind who have been trying their hardest to obtain righteousness don't get it? Make it make sense. Those who were heathens knew nothing about the God that we serve up until Jesus showing up just now. Get all the benefits. They get everything. And those of us who have been waiting for the Messiah all this time and have been serving the one true God all this time and following the laws that he gave Moses, you mean to tell us we don't get it? Right? That's what he's saying. And then he says, even further, he's posing that as a question, and he keeps going further with the question. He says, why not? Because he's saying, why not? Why is that not the case? Why would you question that that's not true? Why not? He's saying, because they pursued it not by faith, but they did it as by their works. They did it, but as if it were by their works. They stumbled over the great stumbling stone, right? The stumbling stone that he's talking about here is actually Christ. He's saying the Jews and the people of Israel have stumbled. And what they stumbled over was they stumbled over God, right? They were so adamant and so religious about the law that they could not even see the Messiah had actually come, right? And they also were trying to obtain righteousness only by their works. Not by faith. And so that's again what we just talked about, that you need proof in order to believe the unbelievable.
Right.
And that's the same thing that the people of Israel was like, we ain't seen the proof yet. But yet the Gentiles were like, we'll just believe what you say, because this sounds like too good of a deal for us to pass up. So you're just saying as long as we got to believe it and have it by faith, we'll do it. And he's saying, yeah, because they pursued that, you guys didn't pursue it by faith, and they did. What it's referring to is showing that salvation cannot be attained by your works. Because if it could be obtained by your works, to a degree, you can control God.
Yeah.
If I can do these things,
Yeah.
God has to do these things, then you can control God. I can guarantee my way to salvation. And then by that, what was the purpose of Christ dying?
Right.
If you can get it. That was the whole purpose of the law, was to show how much we could not do it, how far from the mark that we were. And yet they were still beholding so harshly to the law that they couldn't even fathom the fact that if you just merely let that go a bit and come over here and just believe by faith in salvation, that you can get all this stuff over here that you can't work for, right? It would be like, and this is the dopest thing that thought in my mind. It would be like if somebody came over here to you and said, okay, you want to lose weight? Believe.
Boy, I'd have been.
If you just merely believe in your heart and confess with your mouth that you are slim,
Yeah.
and you are fit, and you are strong, and you are mobile, and you are exactly how you want to look. You have abs, and you know what I'm saying? And you got a small waist, and if you a guy, you got all these muscles. All you have to do is believe, right? if you were to say that to everybody who works out in the gym religiously,
Yeah.
right? The thing about it is this: they wouldn't want to let that. Who's going to take that deal? But what if it was true? You're going to continue to work out. You're going to continue to give. You're going to continue to do cardio every day. You're going to continue to run miles every day. You're going to continue to diet every day. You're going to continue to calorie count every day.
Well, it's what you've been doing, so it would be hard to just quit.
Exactly.
Because especially if you feel like it works.
Or you feel like it's going to work.
Yeah.
Because they hadn't attained it yet.
Yeah.
So that would be the thing, is like these people are still overweight. They're still overweight. They haven't lost any weight. And yet they're saying, but this is the way. This is the way. You got to work hard. You got to sweat. You got to do these things that are difficult. You got to, you know what I'm saying? They were so beholden to their ways that they couldn't even fathom the thought of, just if I believe, I get it freely. Right? And so, but the Gentiles, on the other hand, are like, we fat anyway. So you're telling us we just believe we ain't going to be big no more? Sure, we'll believe. And that was what the problem was. That's where they stumbled over this thing. And then in verse 33 says, as it is written, see, I say in Zion, a stone that causes people to stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. And the one who believes in him will never be put to shame. Right? And so they believed, the Gentiles believed their way in. And the people of Israel were trying to work their way in. Right? But the only way that you're going to get there is through Christ. You can't get there any other way. You're not good enough. You're not righteous enough. You're not clean enough. Your works won't make it happen. And this is where Paul is trying to help them to understand that so many of them, like we just said, this is all they knew and this is their way. So many of them are not going to be able to let go of their way. Thus, this is why only a few Jews are going to be saved. And so he's speaking to the demise of both. He's proven the prophecy of why the Gentiles are included. He's proven the prophecy of why only some Jews are going to be able to get in. And then he goes even further to kind of justify why only some of the Jews are going to actually make it. Because so many of them are going to be unwilling to let go of working their way to salvation and coming over to the understanding of believing their way into salvation. So few will be able to do that there's only going to be a remnant of them left over, right? And then the last part of this that they kind of highlights here is the Paul subtly kind of proves two conflicting ideas at the same time. And we'll wrap it up with this. He kind of proves, he highlights the free will versus the sovereignty of God. If sovereignty, God is all powerful, right? Most people struggle with this. If God is all powerful, then how do I have free will? How do we know that God isn't making us do what he designed us to do? And he has the understanding of predestination. He already has designed and said that certain ones of us are going to make it and some of us are not going to make it, right? And so if that is the case, where does free will even fit in this? It seems like those two things are conflicting theories and conflicting belief systems and ideology. But what Paul has highlighted in this tail end of chapter 9 is that if God was a controlling God, void of free will, he does not like sin. He does not want to be around sin. He doesn't want to be a part of any sin. And he is all powerful, meaning that his way is the way that's going to prevail anyhow. And if that were the case, and he was not a God that allowed there to be free will, as we said earlier, he would wipe you out the minute that you make a mistake. The minute that you step out of his free will, or the way that he wills for your life to go, the minute that you do that, he would just go ahead and eliminate you. Especially those of us that he knows are going to perish anyway. But he doesn't. Thus, it proves that God allows both things to be true at the same time. You have free will to do what you so choose, but yet God is still in all control and all power is still in his hands. So he gives you the ability to still choose. even though he has all power in his hands and he's all knowing. Both things are true. The only thing that's hard for us to understand with our finite minds as humans is we wouldn't do it that way. That's where we really truly stumble. Is that if we had all power, we ain't let nobody just go ahead and disrespect us and do whatever they're gonna do and go against our will. Think about it. If you have anything that you're in control of, right? You get upset when it don't do it. Your phone opens up an app you didn't tell it to open. You are upset with your phone. You're like, what's wrong with this stupid thing? Do what I told you to do, because you're in full control, or supposed to be, of your phone. And the minute it goes rogue, you are upset about it, and you about ready to go get it in this raggedy thing. I'm about to go get a brand new phone, right? And God, again, as Paul highlighted in the scriptures, verse 22 to 23, God shows forbearance. He gives us patience. He's long suffering with us. He shows mercy to all of us, even those that he knows are never going to get right anyway. You can't say that he does not allow free will to exist if he's a God that allows that to continue. You got to remember, he has wrath that's going to happen regardless, and he's going to show his power, but he still gives us the ability and the time and the grace and the mercy to make our own choices. And hopefully you arrive at the correct one. And so that's what we're going to stop there at the end of chapter number 9. We're going to go into chapter 10 next week. Paul is going to continue to keep going towards and kind of talking to the people of Israel a little bit further about where their unbelief and how it is causing them to fall. And then he's going to start to open this thing up about salvation, and about how salvation is for everyone and it is open to everyone. Again, we are Sunrise Christian Fellowship. This is our Bible study for the week. Was there any questions or any comments anybody have online, anything like that? All right. Well, we'll see you guys next week. Oh, I'm sorry. No, we won't see you next week. We will be in prayer next week. Next week will be our prayer week. Join us for our prayer week. We will be going live on our one of our other church pages, New Antioch Christian Fellowship at Aliante. We will be live on there at 6 p.m. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. You're more than welcome to join us in person as well. Come on out and join us for prayer week any one of those 3 days, or all three. All three are going to be good. We'll be at 2550 Nature Park Drive. That's in North Las Vegas, Nevada. You're more than welcome to come join us there. We'll be back here the week after, Wednesday at 6:30 for our Bible study. You have a blessed week. We love you. Hope to see you soon.